on the territory and homelands of the Monacan Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And since we're all joining here from around the world, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous nations where each of us are located. And I encourage you, if you don't know who those Indigenous nations are, to find out and engage with them more directly. I am Adriana Grecci Green. I am the curator of Indigenous Arts of the Americas at the Fralin Museum of Art. And I'm joined this evening by Lauren Molpen, Manager of Education and Programs at the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection, both at the University of Virginia. We are presenting the second webinar in a series, Indigenous Art Perspectives, which is a joint program collaborating between the two university museums. And I am so delighted to be joined this evening by our two panelist artists featured, and by Elizabeth Wise, who will be moderating the session. Elizabeth is a graduate student at the University of Oklahoma in art history, working on her master's degree in examining Indigenous artistic responses to atomic testing on Indigenous lands. She has been working and researching in Australia, in the United States, in particular in the Southwest. And she is also contributing to a forthcoming exhibition, Exposure, Native Art and Political Ecology, that is being organized by the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. She has been working and looking at the artwork of our guests tonight. So without further ado, let me welcome all of you and turn it over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Thank you so much for having me, everybody. I'm honored to be a part of this event, one that I think it will be an insightful and compelling evening of important art and discussion with Dene artist Will Wilson, connecting with us from Santa Fe, and Kokatha Nukanu artist Yuani Scarce, who is with us from Melbourne. Before I give them proper introductions, I'll give a little briefing of our topic tonight, nuclear fallout, which encompasses the layers of underrepresented issues regarding Indigenous peoples in the problematic and ongoing history of the atomic age. Three of these issues are particularly pertinent here: government censorship and secrecy, nuclear colonialism, and generational trauma. On July 16th of this year, it will be 76 years since the world's first atomic detonation, Trinity test in New Mexico in 1945, only the first of hundreds of tests on US soil. Nearly 70 years ago, the British government began its series of atomic tests in Australia at Montebello Islands and in the Western Desert at Emu Fields and Mar-a-Lago in the 50s and 60s. Each government tightly censored and withheld information on these top secret efforts from the media and therefore the general public, creating a false narrative. Significant information was even withheld from whole bodies of government, promoting uninformed legislative decisions. Such traditions of concealment encourage a public amnesia and a free pass to ignore the past. Indigenous communities and lands constitute the majority of those most immediately and severely affected in both countries. Yet Indigenous voices largely tend to be forgotten about in school textbooks and atomic age literature, which reinforces the false history. The term nuclear colonialism refers to the accepting mindset of taking and destructing other people's resources, land, and well-being in the interest of nuclear development. Examples include the government-declared wastelands from Mar-a-Lago that had sustained the Spinifex people for over 40,000 years. Open uranium waste dumps litter Dene country. Ceremonial sites become waste depositories. Mutilated DNA continues passing on through generations, causing cancers and blindness. People were hired for low-grade work, but never informed of risk or given protective equipment. And many have yet to be compensated due to the false history that promotes neglect. These are only a few examples of nuclear colonialism's persistence in many people's lives today. The physical, emotional, and cultural traumas from nuclear colonialism do not just go away. The secrecy hushing these truths only heightens the generational trauma, even as new traumas accrue. Many find it too difficult to share these experiences, the pain being heightened again by outsiders asking for scientific evidence to convince the Western audience, and then denying it even if such evidence is available. University of Oklahoma professor and American Studies and art historian Allison Fields discusses the active grief of mass trauma and how the visual can assist in developing an active memory, a key ingredient in healing, as remembrance is the starting point for inquiry and action. Fields writes, quote, "With greater flexibility than narrative prose, visual expressions of memory offer possibilities for resisting linear, closed-off narratives of the past and for reflecting the continuing and often cyclical nature of trauma," end quote. This emphasizes the importance of Wilson and Scarce's approaches in which each employs the sublime visual, creating truly awesome aesthetic experiences layered with technical processes and discussion, resonating with art historian Terry Smith's triad of the contemporary artist's concerns: placemaking, world picturing, and connectivity. By doing so, their work serves as powerful recourse to challenge the undeniably incomplete atomic age narrative. And tonight, we have the very special opportunity to hear these artists discussing these issues in a cross-cultural, comparative global setting. So thank you, Will and Yuani, so much for being with us and accommodating time differences and such, which has been difficult at times. First, we'll be hearing from Will Wilson, a Dene photographer who was born in San Francisco and spent his formative years living in the Navajo Nation. He received his MFA in photography at the University of New Mexico in 2002. He has won a number of prestigious awards, fellowships, and residencies, including the Native American Fine Art Fellowship from the Autoimmune Museum in 2007, a grant from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, and resident at the Denver Art Museum. He has held visiting professorships at the Institute of American Indian Arts, Oberlin College, and the University of Arizona, and has managed and held critical roles in the National Vision Project and New Mexico Arts temporary installations made for the Environment Program on the Navajo Nation, as well as the Science and Arts Research Collaborative. Currently, he is the King Fellow Artist in Residence at the School of Advanced Research in Santa Fe. And his exhibition, Will Wilson, Air Survey, opened in January at the University of Texas, Austin, and will be open until the 27th of March. So go look it up. Will, you're up.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be with Yuani Scarce, whose work I love, and I'm kind of a fanboy, so yeah, thank you. I'm coming to you from Ogapoge, which is the Tewa word, the Northern Puebloan word for Santa Fe, New Mexico. I guess it translates to white shell water place. And I'm honored to kind of be here and coming from this place. I'm Dene. I'm a contemporary artist. I'm Kia'ani, that's my clan from my mother's side, and on my father's side, I was born for the Irish and Welsh people. And I grew up in Tuba City, and I'll talk some about that. And yeah, just thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to share some images now. If I can get this down. Okay, can you guys see that? The Indian today?
Not yet, not yet, Will.
Okay, I've got to share my screen, I guess. Oops. Sorry about that. This should be second nature by now, but it's not. Okay. Okay, there we go. So you can see the slide now, right? Yes?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I referenced this image because a lot of my work is about just the amazing amount of transformation that's happened culturally, kind of ecologically, environmentally, you know, from the perspective of an Indigenous person. This image, you're looking at my family. The little girl in the foreground is my mother when she was probably about, I don't know, about 10 years old. And she's on her way to Tuba City Trading Post with her sisters. And they ran across an editorial photographer who wanted to make this statement about, you know, linking poverty and Native Americans. And, you know, they were super well provisioned. They were, you know, relatively well off, I think, by Dene terms. But, you know, there was an arrangement made. There was a little exchange of money, and they like posed sourcing water from the side of the road to kind of extend this idea. So, you know, photography for me has been a kind of important, I guess, form of expression, self-expression. And in relation to tonight's topic, I thought I'd focus on a couple bodies of work. This is called Autoimmune Response. It's a project I started actually in 2004. And it kind of follows the travails of this post-apocalyptic Dene man as he's wandering the landscape, trying to figure out what's going on and how to respond to it, right? So Indigenous populations have been talked about in terms of like vector or sentinel populations for autoimmune disease, which are often kind of associated with very quick changes in environment, with kind of foodways, economies. And so the title kind of comes from that notion, but it's also about a response, right? So it's how do we like, you know, claim agency and move forward in this context. And so in this first image, you know, the protagonist is confronted with the harbinger of, you know, this latest version of the apocalypse, I guess. And there's a nuclear test site cloud rising on the horizon on the far left. So the series just kind of follows this person as they're engaging with their environment. And, you know, as they're trying to develop ways to live in this toxic space. The protagonist finds a customary Dene architectural form, right? The hogan, the traditional Navajo house, one room, and it becomes kind of a laboratory or facility for his research and his kind of, you know, engagement with this new environment that he's come into play with. To a certain extent, I was thinking about the Navajo creation story when I was thinking about this. And in the fourth world, immediate previous to where we are now, or actually, I think maybe in the fifth world, the hero twins, born of water and monster slayer, they slay these monsters after this kind of epic quest that they go on in order to make the world habitable for us, right? For humanity, essentially. So, you know, I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking about, you know, kind of the history and legacy of specifically uranium mining and processing on the Navajo Nation. So we follow this figure. Eventually he decides that, you know, he's got to create his own version of the hogan. You have to have shelter in the post-apocalyptic world. And so he fashions, you know, the hogan in his own, of his own making. And this was actually the installation of that first body of work at the Heard Museum in Phoenix, Arizona, curated by Joe Baker. So I've got a few kind of production shots related to this. I think I'll get a chance to show a quick video. You know, textile and weaving are important customary arts for Dene people. Eventually the hogan, the form, it transforms into a greenhouse for the cultivation of indigenous food species, you know, as a response to this kind of shift in foodways. Maybe perhaps this happens on a more industrial scale, and you know, this character is kind of terraforming the world to bring back these plants that, you know, in my mind are like, it's technology that's been developed over thousands of years to work in the environments and situations we find ourselves, you know, happily living in, I think. I also really love the photographic process. And, you know, I think that I try to invoke history of photography often. This is wet plate collodion, which is the process that they used to survey the American West when it first became the American West. You know, this series is ongoing. I've enlisted family members, my mom and my daughter, to be part of the project. And this is a little bit of a shift, but I wanted to share it just because I love this piece. And this was a collaborative piece. We wove a kind of customary Navajo textile based on my grandmother's design. We changed it by creating QR codes, and it's also made of glass. But I'm gonna run this short video. It's about 2 minutes. So, you know, we continued doing some of this weaving of glass beads and incorporating kind of stories and narratives through the textile process and these QR codes. That was a collaborative project produced by myself, Joy Farley, her sister Pamela Brown, good friend Jamie Smith, and Dylan McLaughlin, who did the video production. And you know, it's an odd way to segue to this work, which is, I think, related to the autoimmune response work in that it's, you know, this is more a straightforward survey. This isn't my photograph of kind of the legacy of uranium extraction on the Navajo Nation. Not a lot of people are aware that the worst kind of nuclear accident in US history occurred at the Church Rock uranium mill spill in, this was, I think, 3 weeks or 3 months after 3 Mile Island. But, by the numbers, it was a larger release of nuclear contamination into the environment. And it was on the Navajo Nation at this mill site. It also flowed into the Rio Puerco, which moved through a community, a border town called Gallup, New Mexico. These are evaporation ponds that are hopefully keeping contamination from seeping into the aquifer, right? So they pump this water up. There's plumbing under these sites. This is a site 4 miles out of the community that I grew up in, that I actually played in when I was an adolescent. It's now a Superfund site. There's Tuba City, and there's Rare Metals up at the top. This is a map of abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. And so this project is called Connecting the Dots, but I'm kind of setting off to survey all of these sites. So this is what Rare Metals looks like now. And I'm using drone photography, aerial photography, and, the way that it empowers you to kind of see the landscape in a different way in order to survey these sites and places. This is a place called Mexican Hat. I'm kind of obsessed with this area, this location. I was there with my drone. I started zooming in. I noticed there was a plaque in the center of this vast sea of river rock. And here it explains, it kind of memorializes the fact that there's 4,400,000 tons of radioactive waste interred here. This is a site at Shiprock, New Mexico, also on the Navajo Nation. One of the big issues related to these sites is the potential for water contamination. In the arid Southwest, water is life, and it's such a crucial resource for all communities, really. This is the last active kind of traditional uranium processing mill. It's in Utah, and it's 2 miles upgrade from the Ute Mountain reservation there in White Mesa. And so I kind of counted coup on it with my drone and collected some of these images. But that is the end of my slideshow and my share of kind of current project images. So thank you.
Thanks so much. That was great. And now we have Yuani Scarce, a Kokatha-Nuku interdisciplinary artist who was born in desert country at Woomera, South Australia, home to the largest land weapons testing range in the world. She received her MFA at Monash University in Melbourne in 2010. Scarce also has received a number of prestigious awards, grants, fellowships, and positions, such as the Yalingwa Fellowship in 2020, the Kate Chalice Rocca Award, and the Indigenous Ceramic Award from the Shepperton Art Museum. She has recently exhibited internationally, including France, the UK, Canada, India, China, and in 2012, Scarce exhibited in the host at Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Museum in Charlottesville, Virginia, the host of this event, one of the hosts of this event. She has also had work in a number of biennials, such as the 2020 Adelaide Biennial and the 55th Venice Biennale in 2013. Her work has been collected by the major national and state museums across Australia, and her touring exhibition, Looking Glass with Judy Watson, just closed, I think you said. But you can still look it up. The articles are great about it, the reviews. So Yuani, I will pass it on to you now.
Thank you so much for a lovely, beautiful introduction. I'm very honoured to be speaking here today, and also, you know, very honoured to be speaking alongside another Indigenous artist. And I'd like to acknowledge Will and his work, and I'm a big fan as well. So I think we're both fanning from afar. So but I would also like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I currently live in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I would also like to acknowledge my elders from the Gugatharinukanu people in South Australia, particularly the women in my family, because I come from a long line of strong women, and I feel like I learnt a lot from them, regardless of whether I met them or not. So, I'm very, very proud that of my ancestors. So, I would like to share them with you in a few minutes as well. So, so I'll share my screen. I should know this too. We taught online for 12 months last year during lockdown in Australia. So I think that's. Okay, so I always like to begin with an artist talk to, you know, introducing my family, particularly my ancestors. And these are my great-great-grandparents or great-great-great-grandparents from South Australia. And this photo was taken on Kunaba Mission, which is 40 minutes west of Ceduna, which is, Ceduna is about an 8-hour drive northwest of Adelaide in South Australia, where primarily a lot of my extended family still reside, and also my Auntie Sue Coleman Hasseldine, who is a ICAN, I guess, or anti-nuclear activist. And she's been working with ICAN for quite a number of years. And recently, a few years ago, was a recipient of a Nobel Peace Prize, which I'm very proud, happy to share. She's a very humble woman. So she would be quite, I wouldn't say angry, but she would be quite shy about me sharing that news, because she's a very quiet achiever, as I would like to say, and she's currently working against a private rocket range, actually, that is currently not in development anymore. They're currently testing on the Kunaba community land at the moment, so she's actively trying to stop that. The woman in the young woman in the white dress at the back is my great grandmother, Granny Melba. She was 13 here, and her parents are there, and her siblings in that photo. So this is Granny Melba at 18. Most likely taken, the photo was actually probably taken at Kunaba Mission. It's no longer called Mission anymore, but I think a lot of renaming of those sites are now communities rather than missions. So it's a bit of a reclamation of, I guess, Aboriginal people are still living there, and they're not under the colonial gaze anymore. So they're actively, working on their own community. And various nations live on those communities as well throughout Australia. So my Granny Melba married Papa Willie, who's the handsome man in the middle, looking up, who was a shearer. They went on to have 12 children. She was a tiny woman as well, like she was only 152 centimetres tall, very strong, very powerful. She had, from what I gather, you know, like I think more than 12 children. But I think back in those days, I think, yeah, those that sort of history was kept under wraps. So she, I think was an amazing mother to all of her children, and I think, you know, it filtered down to the rest of us as well. And this is one of her sons, which is my grandfather, Mel Coleman. He and my auntie Beverly in the background there. Both of them sadly are not with us anymore. But my grandfather was when this photo was taken, was an opal miner, and this is taken at Andamuka Opal Fields, which is an hour or so north of Woomera, where I was born. So and my grandparents lived there for quite a number of years. They were a transient couple, but I think they tried to settle there, and I think still under that sort of, you know, I guess before the 1960s, like they were still classified as, you know, under the Flora and Fauna Act. So they still, you know, had some independence, but not a lot. And they still had to apply for permits, etc., to move around the state in South Australia. So, and I think you know, as a miner as well, I think you weren't, you know, he wasn't able to make a lot of money, but you know, they lived out there for a while. They owned their own house, and if anyone visits Andamuka, it's tough country, like it's pretty hot in the summer, and you know, it pretty much shows no mercy. So yeah, but they gave it their best shot, and they, you know, were raising their kids up there. So this is my grandmother Fanny, who is standing actually out the front of the house that they owned at Andamuka. She died quite young from heart disease, sadly, at 42. So I was unable to meet her. So, but apparently I stand like her quite a lot, and so do my nieces. So it's, and she was quite a fierce woman. She didn't put up with a lot of bullshit, and she liked to clean house, and she liked, you know, the nicer things in life as well. So, and she, you know, my grandparents had 5 children, and one of them is my mother. So Mel Coleman. So I just wanted to share this really earlier work of mine that has extended members of my family. My grandfather at 17 in the first jar, my mum and her sister, Zita, my mother at 17, one of those photographs that you would take in photo booths that she did while she was in Adelaide at some point. Running away from her parents, actually. So, you know, chasing a young man in Adelaide. So, and then my mum at 23 with my brother, and my brother at 3, myself, I think around 3 or 4. And then myself and my brother again in Adelaide, apparently. And then my sister, my brother and myself again in Adelaide. So, I'm one of 5 children, and I'm the eldest daughter. So, but at that time when that work was being made, there wasn't a lot of photographs around at that point, because we moved around quite a lot when I was growing up. And as you do, I think things get lost along the way. So, but also part of my research with my practice is retracing that family history and looking for photographic evidence, I guess. Particularly with my the elders in my family as well. So they're really important to me and my family. So I guess, yeah, going right back to the I guess earlier history of South Australia, and it would have been happening around the time that my parents, well, just after my parents moved to Woomera, or just before actually, sorry, that they're in 1950s and early 60s, the nuclear tests began at Maralinga, and a year before that it was at Emu Field in South Australia. So a lot of my work involves field work and visiting sites of nuclear destruction, but also sites of genocide as well. So I've been to Maralinga 3 times now, possibly. Yeah, for some reason I keep thinking 4th, but I will be visiting Maralinga again this year with a group of students that I teach at the Victorian College of the Arts. So this photo was taken in my first visit in 2014, and for those who are not aware of where Maralinga is, it's sort of tucked away in the northwest of South Australia. And Emu Field is probably a half an hour to an hour northeast of Maralinga as well. So these 2 sites were the first land-based testing in Australia, and was, I guess, yeah, pretty hardcore. And I always like to say that it was, you know, like boys with toys blowing up things. And over the years of visiting Maralinga, I have discovered more information sort of being uncovered when you visit there. And one of the tour guides, or the only tour guide, Uncle Robin Matthews, is a fossicker as well. He's been working with that community, the Maralinga Jarrata community, for a long time. And he has always new news or new information whenever I return to Maralinga. So from my understanding as well is that the British decided to test in South Australia for 30 years. The intention was for 30 years. But at the end of the day, they ran out of things to blow up, apparently. So they blew up the land, I guess the surrounding metal infrastructure, cars, planes, you know, sort of mannequins, you know, their own military staff. So it was yeah, pretty full on, I think. And when you visit there, I often say there's a sense of nothing, actually. Like I feel like everyone's just up and left, and that includes the old people as well. So these are one of the signs, one of the many signs that you actually see out there. There's the Maralinga airfield that still exists, and so does the actual tarmac. And the tarmac has never needed any maintenance. It's, you know, it's in pristine condition. And when you visit there, Uncle Robin will tell you that it's was built, to last a lifetime, really. And it is apparently one of the sites that can be used if there's an emergency with a shuttle as well. So they can, it can take that. And it's still often used by the military to bring in Hercules bombers and things like that when there's official events with government and state government at Maralinga. So sometimes veterans do return, and the Aboriginal people in the area do not return, which is fair enough. So so I visited, when this photo was taken, I visited with a group of young glassblowers who work for the Jam Factory, which is a glassblowing facility in Adelaide. And I was invited to create a work for the Tanandi Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Festival in 2015. And I mentioned to the curator, Nikki Cumston, that I was doing quite a lot of research related to Maralinga and my birthplace of Woomera and the Woomera prohibited zone as well. So I had this idea of creating a nuclear fallout cloud. So I enlisted the assistance of the glassblowing associates at the jam factory, and I said that I was really keen for them to visit Maralinga with me so they knew where the story came from. So this is some of them inside of the airport. This is one of the cleanup vehicles. So in the 90s, there was an operation called Operation Bambi, which was a supposed cleanup operation of some of the radioactive material in Maralinga. And so this is one of like a Toyota Land Cruiser that was converted into a cleanup vehicle that the front of it no longer exists, but they did have graters on the front. So the car itself is quite interesting because it was designed to be sealed shut. So, but it's been left behind as part of the open museum. And so over, I think, a period of time, the cleanup operation, I think, dug the ground, areas of the ground to 5 kilometres deep, and vitrified that topsoil into glass, and then they buried it. This is one of the main streets in Maralinga. So in its heyday, as they call it, around 3,000 people lived at Maralinga, and that included civilians. And when it was handed back to the Maralinga Djaritja people, a lot of the infrastructure was sold off so that some of the money could go back to community as well. So the community have tours that operate 6 months of the year. You have 2 tours a week, and you can stay on site at the village, and then you're taken out to some of the test sites as well to see where it all happened. This is the hospital that still stands. The current caretakers live in that hospital. The swimming pool, it was an Olympic-sized swimming pool. They had a cricket ground. They had like a basketball court, things like that. Like it was, yeah, it was pretty flash, as we would call it. So, but everything is sort of covered up now. And this is one of the burial pits, one of, I think, 4 that I've seen. And Uncle Robin Matthews' role is to make sure that those burial pits don't sink, or they don't move, or that any of the sand, like the soil on the top, moves. So if anything changes, people come in and deal with it. So this isn't a really great photo, but this one of the beakers, or I call it beakers, of a marker, a concrete marker of where one of the hottest nuclear tests happen at Maralinga, and this is called the Breakaway Site. So it was one of the tests were I guess the closest to the ground, and then it was so hot it turned the ground to glass. So and that if you see older photos of before the cleanup, it actually were sheets of glass across the ground, and you can sort of see the circumference of the size of the bomb, and a lot of the landscape there and the trees and the bushes haven't grown back, so there's a massive circle around it. But so during the cleanup, they cleaned up majority of the glass, but a lot of that has been left behind. So it's sort of like dark sickly green, and it's not as close as together as what you would see here. Like it's quite scattered across, but I think other tourists and visitors bring them together to take photos. This already existed. I refused to touch that stuff, but it's something that was really important to view and to see, because I've been hearing about it for a long time. So as part of that first trip, this is the work that I created for Tanandi, and it's called Thunder Raining Poison. And it comprises of 2,000 yams suspended at 5 meters high, and it's 3.5 meters wide. And I worked alongside 7 associates at the jam factory, and we created this work within a number of weeks. And I worked with an architect, Michael Roderick, to map each of the yams so that it looked like a mushroom cloud, but also one that was falling. So we would often hear stories of how that substance would hit the ground and look like rain and actually hit people's skin. There's various stories of, numerous clouds traveling across the country in South Australia in different formations, but also the substances were different too. So this was inspired by rainfall. So we clumped a lot of the yams together, and you can see some of those clumping, or that clumping of yams. This is underneath. I always like to show this photo because people are not allowed to climb underneath it or lay underneath it, but during the install process, I think it was really important to capture that moment of what might have been falling on people in South Australia. This is in quite close inside it. So this isn't a great photo of the second cloud. There's actually 3 clouds, but I don't have an image of cloud chamber in the Looking Glass exhibition. I haven't had the chance to get those images yet, but this is the second cloud called Death Zephyr, and it's inspired by weather patterns and wind as well. So some of the clouds that moved along the ground moved to the side, actually. So this I call this the death cloud. It has a mouth and it has wings, and I always imagined that it would creep up on you from behind and actually, take your life, I guess. So, so again, this is 2,000 pieces, and there's 2 types of color. There's the clear and the black, and I was really keen to create something very different to Thunder Raining Poison, and this is probably 8 long, probably longer than that actually, and is 6 meters wide at the mouth of the cloud. So this is some of the images that you actually used to be able to see inside the hospital as well. Uncle Robin, when he was caretaking and actually doing the tours, would collect information and have photographs for people to see of some of the clouds that were the fallout of some of those tests. That's the map. This is probably this is the final work that I'll talk about. It's they're more detailed shots of a work called Hollowing Earth. That's a part of Looking Glass as well. And it's around 50 pieces of large bush bananas that I often use to represent bodies and landscape as well. So it's blown uranium glass actually. So it's very small numbers, I guess a small number of uranium in the color. But it does actually mimic the color of uranium that you dig out from the ground. So I have pierced and burnt a lot of the bananas in this work and cracked it with water to represent the sickness that has come from uranium mining, not just to the landscape, but to the people that do it, but also the Gugutha people as well, because one of the uranium mines, or one of the largest uranium mines, is actually on my country, in Gugutha country, which is an hour north of Woomera, which is pretty close to Andamuka opal fields as well. So it was handed back to traditional owners around about 8 years ago by native title, but then BHP Billiton are now leasing it again for another 30 years. So well, myself and my immediate family do not agree with it. We'd rather it remain sealed and not mined anymore. But unfortunately, yeah, it's going to continue to be mined for another 30 years, if not longer. So, and I believe that, yeah, these holes will, yeah, it's representing those holes that remain in the landscape, because once it's all been dug up, I think Aboriginal people will have nothing. The money, there's no money, there's, you know, and then we have no land left, and then all we have is sickness. So, I guess with burnt glass as well, it's sort of, it's not always pretty, and that's, you know, I like that accidental burning of this, but also, yeah, it shows that sort of scarification of, I guess, yeah, of our landscape and of us as well. Yeah, so that's it. I think I feel like I rambled a bit, but anyway.
Thanks so much, Yuani. Those are beautiful works. I feel so lucky to get to hear the two of y'all, you know, back to back, and now to get to ask y'all some questions in the discussion part of our evening. So actually, you both really answered my first two questions. So we're gonna move on to the third. Which just in case anybody was, if y'all are interested, was just how your art, what your art has meant to your identities, whatever, yeah, community identity, Indigenous identity, or personal, which are all obviously related, and how your medium challenges maybe stereotypes of what people expect Native American or Aboriginal Australian arts should look like. And I think that both of you really already answered those questions. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which was touching on something I briefly mentioned in my introduction, that all three involved governments between the two countries went to great extents to conceal the truths of nuclear efforts from the public. And I'd love to hear what y'all have to say, and how your art addresses these, how y'all have witnessed, if you have witnessed, these ongoing effects of historical government concealment and secrecy of nuclear colonialism, and how your art challenges these patterns. And whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Will, do you want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes me think of a few things. I don't think that the general public is aware of kind of where a lot of the fissile material came from or was sourced from, you know, in the development of the first nuclear weapon at Los Alamos, and then later during the Cold War and the nuclear arms race. You know, I don't know the numbers, but in Alison Field's book, she mentions 700 million tons of yellow cake being sourced from the Southwest. And a lot of that came from Indigenous land. I mean, some would argue that all of it came from Indigenous land, but, you know, I think a lot of people know like the story of the Navajo code talkers who used language to create this unbreakable code that helped win the war. But, you know, not a lot of people are aware that the first research for the first nuclear weapon was supported by the labor of Navajo men and women who were working in these mines, sourcing this material. And, you know, I think that the government, the US government, was well aware of the toxicity of this material, but did not provide, you know, the necessary kind of personal protective equipment that we all are very aware of these days, you know, for these people. And I think now this came up to me the other day in a conversation, but it was probably some of those code talkers coming back from the war who actually ended up working in those mines and getting sick and dying because of the, you know, the cancers and the disease that's associated with that. So, I mean, I think it's like a vastly underreported story that I think people on the, you know, Dene folks know well, and I think most families like are 1 or 2 degrees of separation from somebody who's kind of experienced the trauma of this legacy. But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think art can be a powerful tool to convey some of that history.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think particularly during the I guess the nuclear tests, there was it was shrouded in secrecy for such a long time that people were, you know, didn't know about it, and still a lot of Australians don't know about it. Like it's, and I think that's what, you know, I think the Australian government and the British government knew what they were doing when they chose that site for Emu Field and Maralinga. So it was, you know, if you wouldn't, you know, if you drive along the air highway towards Western Australia, there's a turnoff that you go to towards Maralinga, and you wouldn't even know that it exists. So it's tucked away in these little hills in the middle of the desert. But and also going back to the Woomera prohibited zone, it's still overseen by the military. So for me, as a traditional custodian of my Gulgitha country, I still have to ask or work with the military to gain access to my own country. So so it's sort of like there's still this enforcement of keeping everything separate and keeping people away from finding out more about, you know, South Australia in general, I think, you know, with uranium mining and with nuclear tests as well. So it's, I think what I do know as well during the nuclear tests, that there were so many Aboriginal people that died, you know, as a result of those and of those tests. And it's because we weren't counted as citizens in those days. Like it was sort of, for me, it's a mass genocide. So it would, they were able to do that without being held accountable. So, and I hear stories of the ground being opened up and military creating a mass grave of Aboriginal bodies. So, yeah.
Elizabeth, I'm just going to jump in really quick because we just had a question for Will that relates to what Yuani just said. And the question is whether, Will, you've had any, if you've encountered any obstacles in the process of accessing the sites that you have photographed.
You know, as an individual kind of roaming around the Navajo Nation, and I guess I think of this as I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation, right? And I'm photographing these spaces to kind of illuminate this history. I haven't sought any, and I haven't had any problems in particular, just because, I don't know, I think I'm, as one person out in this kind of vast space, accessing these sites. I mean, when I did go to that one uranium processing mill, I went on Sunday morning early, and I parked in a kind of off the beaten track location. And I mean, on one level, you know, I'm really kind of excited about the potential for this technology that I think was initially, you know, built around the idea of surveillance as a kind of counter surveillance form, you know, or just its possibilities for, you know, bearing witness to these things. And but I should say that I'm currently kind of working towards a grant proposal with Dene College, which is, you know, a tribal college seated in the Navajo Nation. And in terms of photographing people and talking to specific people who are survivors, there is a very kind of thorough, well thought out process. It's, you know, the IRB process, the internal review board. And that's just to make sure that like the correct protocol and kind of respect is, and care is taken if you're going to deal with like human to human kind of interview and contact. And so I've known about it for a while, and I'm kind of gearing up to go through those steps. And I'm actually happy about the fact that kind of limitation of access is there. But I haven't, to answer the question more directly, of the landscape.
Okay, and actually something that you were just getting to, well, with IRB and just protecting people, and that kind of, in a way, segues me to the next question. So, given the detrimental effects of these nuclear efforts and the direct proximity to Indigenous communities, can you speak to the realities of the trauma and generational trauma as it relates to the topic and your work?
Sorry. Oh, yeah, I always think it's more respectful for someone that's on the First Nations on the ground there to speak first. So it's up to you, Will. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of trauma for sure. I mean, it affects lots of people. I don't think anybody, or I think most families who've lived out there have experienced this. You know, I have, like, a great uncle of mine worked in the mines, and there's some question about whether or not my grandfather died because of disease associated with that. When I was in residential school, at boarding school, I was kind of the caretaker for a while for this guy who, now I realize there's this thing called Navajo Neuropathy, and it's kind of a specific, you know, genetic condition that they have. There's strong, I guess, corollary relations to exposure to uranium when you're in utero. You know, there's a Navajo birth cohort study that's following Navajo moms and their children, and they're finding these like super high elevated rates of uranium in their bloods. And yeah, I mean, this stuff is toxic for a long time. And I think art practice is some way to kind of process some of that trauma. I mean, I think I'm kind of easing closer and closer to a more kind of like person to person like work, but I'm still on the outside of that, I guess.
And you
that's a hard question.
Yeah, I think there's still quite a lot of sickness within my immediate family as well, like in Sejuna, particularly with thyroid issues and needing to remove them. And it's not just older generation, it's the younger ones as well. And there's a lot of cancer amongst the community in Sejuna, of, you know, within the non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal community there. So it's and it's, you know, this is 60 or, you know, nearly, you know, 65 years later after the first test. So it's still happening. And I hear stories off and on about children still being born blind, and with other issues as well, because I think with radiation poisoning and uranium poisoning, it comes up in different ways. I think, you know, like I've been told by some scientists as well that, and academics, that it does change your DNA. So it does weird things. And so, you know, like there's still, you know, people with smaller lungs, skin conditions, cancers that turn up in weird places inside the body. So I think, you know, it's still, I think here in Australia, it's still yet to be acknowledged properly. And, you know, there's, from my knowledge as well, that there's very little research happening, I think, because I think when we met the other day, I said that Australia's very good at trying to forget what has happened in the past. So it's sort of like, this isn't, yeah, it's not a priority for them to do any research related to ongoing illness. And so a few years ago, that when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, he awarded First Nations people a gold veterans card, which was for, you know, like to receive the best health care for those survivors of nuclear colonisation in South Australia. But a lot of them are dead. Like, a lot of them have passed away now. So it's, but then some of their family is saying, what about the young ones that are being born now? How is it going to help them? Or how is it go? Yeah, because they're being ignored. So, but yeah, I think, you know, creating art is, you know, to, you know, speak about these issues is such an amazing way to tell these stories. I think, like, it's something that, you know, not everyone's going to read a book or sit down and talk to other people. And I often find when you're trying to talk to someone who doesn't want to listen, they're never going to listen. But then if you can create an artwork that might hit them in the face or knock them around a bit, you know, and they're never going to forget it. It's always going to reoccur in their memory at some point.
I mean, that visual attachment to it as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So do y'all find that, so I guess you kind of answered this. So Will, do you also find that your art allows you to have these conversations, sometimes gives you the opportunity to share these things and sometimes engage in conversation with people about them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm super excited about the potential for this collaboration. And, you know, even if we don't get the grant, I'm going to go, you know, try and create other kind of connections with folks out there who've dealt with these issues. I mean, Dene College has a Dene Environmental Institute, and one of their focuses is, you know, the kind of legacy of uranium mining on the Navajo Nation. And yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about remediation and what that means, and how do you kind of transform the notion of remediation to fit like the specificity of, you know, an indigenous space and indigenous land. I mean, you have to deal with the history, right? So that you can kind of have a just transition to something kind of new. I mean, there's a lot of other extractive things going on in the Navajo Nation, and there's this big shift, I think, thankfully, towards more sustainable forms of like energy production. Like, you know, we have the giant coal-fired power plants, and coal mining on the Navajo Nation has been this huge, you know, issue. But there's a big movement towards renewables now, and that's really exciting. You know, I mean, I think all these things are kind of related and woven together, and yeah, I think conversations happen all the time around the work. Yeah.
Lauren, do I have time for one more for them? I know I think you said we have a lot of, you're muted.
Yeah, why don't you do one more, and then we'll do one audience question, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, yeah. And this is tough, which one of these shoes, maybe I'll, all right, I had, I'll let y'all pick, okay? So I had a follow-up to that last one of, do you think that there is, so I have found that there is, that the generational and just the firsthand trauma of all of this is, it in some instances makes it too painful for people to want to talk about it and open up about it and have these difficult conversations. And just wondering if you feel like that resistance, that understandable resistance to talk, if it adds to the lack of public awareness. And so that's one question. Then the other one is a little bit more fun. So I know that y'all have both been aware of each other's work and fans of each other's work before this webinar. Yeah, wondering what you
what really drew you to each other's work and to the other's work and appreciated about it, and stuff like that. So I'll let y'all pick. One is more down the very serious road of important stuff, and one's a little bit more lighthearted.
Nice. Can I say I'll choose the second one if that's all right, because I think what I love about being an artist and an Aboriginal artist from Australia is that we get to meet other people from other countries that share the same story, and I think and you draw inspiration from those artists. So like I said, I've known about Will's work for a long time, and I really love that we've been able to talk, have this conversation today with each other as well, and it's really nice to connect that way. So I think I've been an artist for 15 years, I think, and what I've learned a lot, is particularly in the last few years with more, international research, not just national research within my own country, but that we all have this shared history, but at different times as well. And I think I see it as a way of, working through that together and sharing that knowledge and helping each other out, I guess. So I don't know what else to say really, but it's sort of like for me it's just, sort of having a lot of love for the other artists because they inspire me. Yeah, so Will inspires me to do more. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, that there's this international network kind of slowly developing of different kind of Indigenous voices who are dealing with kind of very similar but specific issues, but there's so much overlap, and it's inspiring to see. I think the first time I saw Yuani's work, I was just drawn to the object quality of all of these vessels, hanging, and then I was like, yams, what is that about? And then when I found out it was like nuclear fallout, I was like, oh my god, it is that thing, that sublime beauty that draws you in and then kind of whacks you on the head, and you're just forced to deal with this reality. So but I don't know. I think that art is a good way to process stuff and also to kind of communicate. And I think artists are really good at creatively kind of imagining solutions to complex problems. And, I could just imagine this collaborative group of people coming together to form all of these little vessels, and the kind of dialogue and conversation that happened in relation to that, while this process is going on. I mean, we had that experience because most of the people who helped me weave that textile that I showed the video from were Navajo and are Navajo, and they're weavers as well. And so we all kind of bonded around this kind of repetitious task that we had to do. It was like a sewing circle or something, or like a quilting bee, and we had amazing dialogue and conversation about, what's formed. So yeah, it's a great way to bring people together to talk about stuff deeply, I think.
That's great. I think that's a really nice place to end with this idea of an Indigenous community, or plural, coming together to share these histories and to share ideas and be inspired by one another. So I'm so grateful to you both, to all three of you, for joining us this evening for this discussion. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has too. I just want to take the time to thank the UVA Arts Council and the Mellon Indigenous Arts Initiative for supporting this event. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.